Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something pretty heavy but absolutely crucial to understand. We are objectively analyzing recent criminological and legal reports that document a massive 15-year shift in law enforcement under the previous regime. We're looking at exactly how a police force morphed from being professional public servants into what the reports actually describe as a state-sanctioned armed cartel, eventually becoming viewed by the public not as protectors, but as outright enemies. Let's get right into it.
To make sense of this massive institutional shift, we're going to break this down into 5 key areas. We'll start with the horrific events of July and August, then look at that 15-year transition into a state cartel, dive into the system of impunity with a specific case study, explore the legal battle of orders versus liability, and wrap up with command responsibility and justice.
All right, Section 1, the horrific picture of July and August 2024. Let's start with the immediate symptom of this breakdown, what we all witnessed on the surface. The source material here is graphic, and it is very clear. It describes the streets in areas like Bada, Uttara, and Jatra Bari not as standard riot control zones, but literally as unequal battlefields. We are not just talking about tear gas and batons. The reports confirm the silent, incredibly lethal use of 7.62mm sniper rifles. These were fired from rooftops and armored personnel carriers, directly targeting the heads and chests of young protesters. And then there's the truly grim aftermath. In Savar and several other areas, bodies were actually piled into vans and set on fire, specifically to destroy the evidence. The reports note that law enforcement essentially declared war on the citizens, shooting at unarmed students who had their hands up, and even firing at children standing near windows. This absolute breach of duty is what transformed extreme public fear into explosive anger, basically turning the police into sheer public enemies overnight. Now, you might be wondering, weren't they just following orders? Well, that brings up a crucial legal definition highlighted in the analysis, a manifestly illegal order. Legally speaking, an order to shoot an innocent person or a student with their hands up is manifestly, obviously illegal. The sources emphasize that under the law, officers actually have a strict moral and legal obligation to disobey those commands. You just cannot use a badge to justify a massacre. Moving on to Section 2, from protectors to a state cartel. So how on earth did we get here? How does a police force reach the point of firing sniper rifles at its own youth? The criminological analysis contrasts the theoretical social contract of policing against the really grim reality of what actually took over. Normally, under a democratic social contract, police are professional public servants tasked with protecting lives and basic rights. But over the 15-year span from 2009 to 2024, the reports describe how the force systematically transitioned into a state-sanctioned armed cartel. The state apparatus was deliberately weaponized by the ruling regime to commit crimes, silence any opposition, and just maintain political power at all costs. The root disease behind this whole transformation is what the reports define as systemic impunity. This is a structural condition where officers know, with absolute 100% certainty, that they will face zero punishment for crimes committed using state power. In fact, it was the opposite. The sources point out that extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances were frequently rewarded with medals, rapid promotions, and lucrative postings. This created a literal license-to-kill mindset that just completely shattered whatever professional ethics were left. Over this 15-year period, the sources map out a really terrifying playbook of specific crimes and their societal results. First, you have the black sites, places like ARB's TFI cells, the infamous A-Nugger, and secret DB prisons. These were used for enforced disappearances, which essentially erases a person's legal existence. Under international law, that is a crime against humanity. Then you have the hostage rackets. Officers would snatch people in the dead of night, threaten them with crossfire, and extort millions. It was basically transforming state forces into a criminal gang. And finally, if they couldn't find their actual target, they would frequently subject female family members to abuse and humiliation. This tactic completely destroyed societal safety nets and any remaining trust in the law. That brings us to Section 3, Systemic Impunity and the Alab Udin case. To really wrap our heads around how terrifying this impunity was on a human level, the reports focus on one specific, devastating case study. We are presenting this respectfully, but it is so vital to understand the psychological warfare here. The reports sequence the events starting in May 2018. Former RAB officer Alep Udin detained a man under false militant tags. Using the very real threat of crossfire against her husband, he summoned the wife to the RAB office. During the holy month of Ramadan, she was forcibly made to break her fast, and weeks later subjected to coercive custodial rape right inside the RAB mess. Traumatized and with nowhere to turn for legal help, the victim suffered a complete mental breakdown and tragically passed away years later. From a legal standpoint, the analysis highlights exactly why this wasn't just a standard assault case. This was coercive custodial rape and institutional torture. The perpetrator used the color of authority, meaning he used his state-issued uniform, weapons, and rank to pull this off. Blackmailing a wife with her husband's life is categorized as severe psychological warfare. Ultimately, the reports conclude this directly violated her right to life. And because it was part of a broader, systematic abuse of state power, it qualifies as a crime against humanity under the ICT Act of 1973.
So you have to ask, how did guys like Alabuddin get away with this for so long? Well, it was a rigged system. The sources point to systemic immunity. They exploited legal loopholes, specifically Section 197 of the Criminal Procedure Code, which basically meant you needed prior government permission to even prosecute an official. On top of that, they had the institutional power to just erase CCTV footage and destroy official logbooks. And with zero witness protection laws in place, victims were left completely defenseless and terrified into silence. But impunity doesn't always last forever. Following the anti-discrimination movement in November of 2024, Alabuddin was finally arrested in connection with a murder case. According to the latest data in the reports, he is currently sitting in jail without bail, facing active investigations by the International Criminal Tribunal for Disappearances, Torture, and Crimes Against Humanity. Okay, Section 4, Orders versus Legal Liability. This leads us right to a massive legal crossroads analyzed in the reports, the defense of just following orders. The sources rely heavily on international criminal law and the Nuremberg principles here. Simply put, no member of a force can escape liability for heinous atrocities by just saying they were following a superior's command. Putting on a uniform doesn't mean you lose your conscience or your basic understanding of right and wrong under the law. International law uses this concept called joint criminal enterprise, or JCE, to break down who is to blame. Think of it like this. The high-ranking political commanders who planned the black sites, handed out the sniper rifles, and covered up the footage, they are equal partners in the atrocity under JCE. But crucially, the trigger-pulling member, the guy on the street who actually fired the bullet or piled the bodies into the fire, holds individual liability. Both the mastermind in the office and the foot soldier on the street share equal criminal responsibility. And finally, Section 5, Command Responsibility and Justice. So how do you actually fix this? How does a whole nation cure a disease this deep that literally turned its protectors into a cartel? The reports lay out 4 main pillars for moving forward. First, utilizing the International Criminal Tribunal to prosecute these acts as systemic crimes against humanity, not just writing them off as isolated mistakes. Second, setting up a completely independent citizen oversight commission, so the police are no longer investigating themselves. Third, real command accountability, meaning the absolute highest-ranking officials face justice. And fourth, reparations. The state has to formally apologize and financially compensate the shattered families left behind. I'm going to leave you with this final thought based on everything we've unpacked today. Can a society truly heal, and can citizens ever actually trust a uniform again without uprooting the entire system of impunity? True justice, according to these reports, requires way more than just punishing the visible few on the streets. It means dismantling that state-sanctioned cartel from the very top down. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking the tough questions.